Hello and welcome to Unstress. I'm Dr Ron Ehrlich. Listen, the average person is still under this delusion that food should be someone else's responsibility until they're actually ready to eat it. You know, the magical, marvellous thing about food on our plate, this sustenance we absorb, has a story to tell. It has a journey. It leaves a footprint. It leaves a legacy to eat with reckless abandon, without conscience and without knowledge. Well, folks, this ain't normal. And that quotes from Joel Salatin's book, Folks, This Ain't Normal. He is arguably the world's most famous farmer. The farm is called Polyface Farm. He goes around the world lecturing to people about an alternative way to farming. And now we hear a lot about the carbon economy and climate change and carbon in the atmosphere and all this. And a lot of people actually do go vegan as well for ethical reasons about cruelty to animals and environmental stress, you know, water and the resources that go into this factory farming. But a lot of people don't realise that a big part of the answer to both of those problems, carbon sequestration, ethical growing of food, reducing environmental stress, actually occur on the farm. And that's a very positive connection, which I'm going to talk to my guest today, Joel Salatin, all about. It's such a great conversation. I mean, I could talk to Joel for hours. I almost did. And I hope you enjoy this chat that I had with Joel Salatin. Welcome to the show, Joel.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Ron.
Joel, I am a dentist, and I don't know how many dentists in the world have your book, Folks, This Ain't Normal, in their waiting room for sale, but I'm one of them. I love what you're doing. You know, obviously, we were so impressed by what you're doing, and we're going to go into that. But I was wondering if you could share with our listeners what is going on in our food system now. How is the majority of our food grown today?
Well, the majority of our food is grown from a kind of a philosophical underpinning that it is fundamentally mechanical and not biological. And, you know, there's a big difference between machines and living things. Living things can heal, machines can't. You know, if a bearing goes out, you can rest it, but the bearing doesn't heal up, you know, when you rest it. And machines, you know, you can pull pieces apart pretty easily. You know, living things, you can't have a finger without a hand or an eye without a head. It's a much more intricate, interdependent kind of system. And so it's not just parts that, you know, that you can plug in and plug out. Right now, the way our food is produced is essentially like a machine. Can we grow it faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper? Can we manipulate this? Can we insert this over here, extract this over here? It's grown with chemical fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, you know, factory farm situations where animals are, you know, denied exercise, fresh air, sunshine, all those kinds of things, with a lot of pharmaceuticals to keep them alive. Produce is grown, you know, with fumigations and that sort of thing. And so the result is that we are essentially disrespecting life to create something that's supposed to give us life. And life gives life. You know, there's a big difference between the life that's in, you know, squeezable Velveeta cheese compared to artisanal craft cheese that grows mold, you know, and puts it on the table, and in 3 days it grows legs and walks off the table. That's real food. That's living stuff, not this sterile, you know, mechanical stuff. So that's our problem in our food system.
And what proportion of food grown in America is grown through this mechanical industrialized model?
Well, it depends on who you read after, but the low figure right now is probably 2%, and the high figure is 5%. So somewhere between 2 and 5% is grown in a biologically respectful way, and the rest of it is not. So it's a pretty large percentage.
Right. So we're talking about over 95% of food that is consumed in America, and there's no reason to suppose that that's very different in Australia, is grown through this mechanical industrialized system. That's extraordinary. And I guess the word about sustainability comes to mind, but we're going to come to that later. When did this all change? What was the big shift here? Because this wasn't how it always was.
Well, no, it certainly wasn't, and it was certainly incremental. And, you know, I think it's important as we look at the context of this and the incremental movement that brought us to where we are, to appreciate some of the realities that our forebears had. They didn't have some of the really, really cool things that we have today that has made actually, regenerative systems easier than they were a long time ago. The big push developed in 1837 when Justus von Liebig, the Austrian biochemist, used vacuum tubes to grow plants, and he determined that all of life is simply a rearrangement of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, known in agriculture circles as NPK.
Yeah.
And once that discovery was made, and he of course flooded the globe. I mean, he was the darling of the whole globe at that time. He was looking for an alternative to manure and to decomposition, to carbon decomposition. And he said, man, if we could just manufacture this N, P, and K, we wouldn't have to rely on decomposition and manure and things like that. And you wouldn't have to shovel anything and blah, blah, blah. So I'm willing to posit that his intentions were very, very sincere. And he was seeing, worn out soil. He was in what it took about just 20 years from the discovery of those massive amounts of guano that the cormorants and the pelicans out there off the coast of Peru, it was 100 feet deep of centuries of
Manure.
Manure, yes. And this stuff was shipped. They used basically Chinese slave labor to dig it and put it in steamships and brought it to the U.S. and to the U.K. The U.K. took a lot of it. But the thing to remember is that this centuries or millennia buildup of manure from these seabirds was literally scraped to the stone in fewer than 20 years.
Wow.
And so as the population began to increase, how do you maintain fertility was a big question. And so we moved from there, gradually into, of course, the Industrial Revolution, the development of the reaper and the combine and all that during the 1800s. And then, of course, massive urbanization and factories, which took labor out of the towns and brought them to cities and started to really segregate the rural and urban populations. And then you had refrigeration, which allowed perishable food to be transported long distances. That put the final nail in the coffin of having to stay with a local-centric food system, so that by World War II, we were well on our way to a mechanical view, and then World War II put the kibosh on it, because ammunition, weapon, explosives are made from N, P, and K.
Right.
So World War I and World War II pumped all that war money into the mining, distribution, development, laboratory, refining and everything of N, P, and K, and made it extremely, extremely cheap. And so essentially the subsidy of the war effort into the NPK development gave it kind of a concessionary, inordinate financial, head start, okay?
Yep.
And so, in post-World War II, you're a farmer, you need fertility, you've been shoveling all your life, and somebody brings you a little bag and says, if you put this on, you don't have to shovel anymore. Which would you do? My point is, slice great-grandpa a little bit of slack here. He was tired of shoveling.
Yep, fair enough.
So it was like there was a starting gun went off after World War II, but the chemical approach had a 2-lap head start.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until the late 50s and early 60s that we started seeing little front-end loaders, chippers, chainsaws, the ability to actually do large-scale composting efficiently, to run a carbon-centric fertility program. Sir Albert Howard wrote an agricultural testament in 1943, which was kind of the beginning of the whole, understanding of the decomposition cycle and the scientific composting system. So it took a while for all of the parts to metabolize a high-technology, efficient, carbon-centric program. It took a while for all those pieces to develop.
Now, Joel, you've jumped ahead to what you are doing because Albert Howard was a really important kind of proponent of that. Is that right? Was that not?
Oh, yes. Yes, I mean, he's the godfather.
Yeah, but we're going to get to that because, we want to know there is a better way of doing things. But I guess the other thing that happened too, and I heard you quote about this, the first supermarket coming on the American landscape in 1946, and of course out of the Second World War where they were doing K rations for millions and millions of troops, they had a perfect system of processed food. So they had a whole lot of ammunition, N, P and K, that could be now used for fertilizers, but they also had a system of processing food that led to supermarket, and that changed everything again as well, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did. I mean, to be able to can in tins, this was all also part of that whole war effort to make food unperishable, to be able to store food for a long time. Before then, you had to stay somewhat local-centric and seasonal. You kind of had to stay within the boundaries of your ecological nest simply because, you couldn't store forever and you couldn't ship. Meanwhile, don't forget, we had the big the oil boom in Texas. And then shortly after that, the whole Middle Eastern oil thing blew up, Venezuela. And so suddenly now we had cheap energy so we could transport things, we could store things, and we could artificially grow things. I mean, this sounded like utopia, right? And guess what? I'll be kind of stereotypical now. The woman can be freed from the kitchen and can join the workforce, and all of this can be farmed out to big corporations to take the drudgery out of your life, and you can spend your day learning about the Kardashians instead of canning tomato sauce.
Yeah. And let's face it, it's a great economic model. There's just a bit of a problem with it, isn't it?
Well, there is.
A little bit of a problem.
The little bit of a problem is that life is fundamentally biological and not mechanical. And so in this movement and the growth of industrial farms, the growth of large-scale processing, slaughterhouses, canneries, and now all the way to mescaline mix that's shipped, 3,000 miles in refrigerated jetliners, all of this kind of stuff, then what we started seeing was nature's balance sheet. Of course, this was documented by Rachel Carson in Silent Spring. We started seeing infertile frogs, three-legged salamanders, eagle eggs that would not hatch because we were powdering our kids' hair with DDT. We were doing all sorts of things, and sure enough, the consequences, the externalized consequences of all this, because nature is fundamentally biological, started to come home to roost. And so by the late 70s and the early 80s, we started seeing this growing and building awareness of, maybe all this stuff isn't all what it's cracked up to be, and a new lexicon developed, a new lexicon of words that you and I, as little children, never heard. Words like salmonella, campylobacter, listeria, E. coli, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, avian influenza, swine flu, whatever, even phrases like food allergy. I didn't know I never even heard that phrase as a child. Food allergy, type 2 diabetes, all these things.
Yeah, and add to that, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will contract cancer by the age of 60, and we're getting older. That's the answer, supposedly, but even allowing for age, there's a 25 or 30% increase in cancer, 80 autoimmune diseases. I mean, at the end of the day, it may be a great economic model, but it ain't a very good health model. In fact, to coin your words, folks, this ain't normal.
That's right. That's right. And nature does indeed bat last. There will be a balancing of those accounting sheets in nature, in ecology, one way or the other, and that's exactly what we're starting to see now. We're starting to see now in the developed world the first generation of young people who doesn't think they're going to live as long as their parents. This whole trend is a tough trend. The United States now leads the world. Isn't it fun to say we lead the world? But it's not fun to say we lead the world in chronic morbidity. That's that's not the 5 causes of chronic morbidity we lead the world in. Through sanitation and soap and plumbing, we've kind of eradicated the infectious diseases, but it's the non-infectious that have now replaced them due to our lack of nutrition and other things, exercise and that sort of thing. So here we are. Here we are at this place, and we now have a growing awareness that the chemical, conventional, industrial food orthodoxy lacks something. And so we're seeing increased interest in authentic food, authentic ecology, authentic nutrition. And the name of the game today is authenticity in food, landscape management, that sort of thing. And that's the exciting place we're in now.
Which is exactly now. Here we go, Joel. This is exactly why we're talking to you today, because honestly, I think if there was the world's most famous farmer, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say you'd be it. But you've raised this profile of biological approach to farming to another level. Can you tell our listeners what's the difference? What's going on out there at Polyface Farm that's different from what you've just described?
Well, there are several differences. First of all, we run what we call a total carbon-centric outfit. So while we don't spend money on chemical fertilizers, it doesn't mean that we're disinterested in fertility. So we look at nature. We look at nature as a template and say, well, how does nature build soil? Well, nature builds soil with in situ carbon. Carbon on site doesn't move very far, and it regenerates into the soil either as decomposing plant material or manure from animals. Those are the 2 basic ways that brown stuff, that carbon, feeds the soil. And guess what? It goes on top of the ground. It doesn't get tilled in.
You're talking about carbon sequestration here, Joel.
Yes, we are talking about carbon because a plant inhales carbon dioxide and it breaks off the carbon, hangs onto it, exhales the oxygen, and then you and other animals then breathe in the oxygen, and we give out the carbon and breathe out the carbon dioxide. So this is a big cycle that goes on. And so how do we actually sequester that carbon in the soil? It's sequestered through biomass production, and it's not sequestered through chemical fertilizer or anhydrous ammonia or any of the other techniques. And the single thing that destroys it most quickly is tillage.
You mean turning over the soil and ploughing the land?
Yes, plowing the land in order to plant row crops. And so what we do here is we're all in grass. All the animals are on grass. The cows are on grass. The chickens are on grass. The pigs, the turkeys. Everything is on pasture, and well, of course, the herbivores, the cows, don't receive any supplemental grain. The pigs do, and the chickens do, but it's a reduced amount because they're eating a lot of pasture. And the herbivore then is moved, just like in nature when you see the migratory choreography of the wildebeest on the Serengeti. The herbivores are moved every day using high-tech electric fencing to a new spot. They don't stay on the same field for more than a day. Every day they go to another paddock using high-tech portable electric fencing. So now we have plastic pipe that we're able to pipe water so that we can pipe water to every single field very, very cheaply. We have portable water troughs. We have portable control mechanisms, that's electric fence, and portable shelter with nursery shade cloth now, very, very cheap, a spun polyethylene fabric, basically. They use it in nurseries and everything all over the world. We've used this for our animal shelters. And with a bandsaw mill, as opposed to the old-style big circular mills that removed a centimeter of wood every stroke, with the bandsaw mill, we're only removing about 3 millimeters of sawdust per stroke. So we can now afford, with a bandsaw mill, to cut tinker toy material to make very lightweight shelters with nursery shade cloth to have ambulatory, portable livestock shelters in the field So we have portable, shade trees. As soon as all this modular mobility develops, this is space age technology that we're talking about. But what it enables us to do is mimic the patterns and templates of migratory choreography of megafauna that we see all over the world, and we can mimic it on an extremely small, personally owned acreage, whether it's 2 acres or 1,000,000 acres. It's completely scale independent because the equity is in our management and our knowledge and our skill, our mastery of the skill to be able to mimic that movement choreography.
So you've taken yourself completely out of the chemical, fertilizer, herbicide, dependency on that, and just use nature's own. Well, you talked about all that biomass on the beaches of Peru, but you're kind of using it as you move your animals around your farm. How big is the farm?
We own 650 acres, and we lease another 1,200 acres. So we're running almost 2,000 acres under our management, but 500 acres of that is forest. So we have about 1,500 acres of pasture and 500 acres of forest.
Wow! And how many? The question is, can this system of farming feed the world?
Well, that's the most common question I get asked. That, and then if we could, can we afford it? So let's deal with, can it actually feed the world? The first thing to realize is that for the first time in human history, half of all human edible food is thrown away. It's the wrong size, it's too long, it's too short, it's too fat, it's too skinny, it's too whatever, This has never happened in human history before, that we throw away half of our food. So we could literally increase the world population by 4 billion people and still have plenty of food if we didn't throw away if we didn't throw away so much. So nobody's going hungry because there's not enough food. There are certainly people going hungry, but it's not because there's not enough food. It's because there's some socio-political upheaval in a town or a region, or the road caved in and the truck can't get through the path, or whatever.
I mean, Joel, the problem is that we've got about 1.6 billion people who are overweight or obese, and we've got about 700 million who are undernourished. So that's just a little bit of an imbalance there. But yeah, okay.
Sure. Absolutely. There is a lot. But secondly, beyond that, the systems that I'm describing are actually far more productive per acre or per square yard than anything the industry is throwing at you. When we use our acreage, I'll just give you, for example, our cow days per acre. A cow day is what one cow will eat in a day. So if we took all the food that you ate today and put it on a plate, that would be one person day of food. Yeah. So a cow day is what one cow will eat in a day. And our county average in our area, with our rainfall, climate, soil type, blah, 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 it averages 80 cow days per acre, and we're averaging 400 cow days per acre, and we haven't planted a seed or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer in 60 years.
Wow.
So the fact is that when you tap into the symbiotic and synergistic patterns of nature, they're simply far, far more productive. And it should give everybody pause to realize that 500 years ago, the United States grew far more food than it does today. Now, the United States was not in existence then, but the land mass that is today's United States grew way more food 500 years ago than it does today. We had 200 million bison. We had a couple million wolves eating 20 pounds of meat a day. We had 200 million beavers. 8% of the landscape was in beaver ponds. We had flocks of birds that were so big. We have diaries like Audubon sat under a tree in 1800. He said, I haven't seen the sun for 3 days because of the flock of birds that flew over and blocked out the sun for 3 days. And that's before John Deere and chemical fertilizer and plows and all of this stuff. So the truth is that these biomimicry, synergistic, multi-speciated, complex relational systems are far more productive than the seeming wow the seeming wow of factory farming and chemical farming. You see the size. When the industry takes a picture, for example, of a big factory chicken house, says, look how productive this is. Look how much we're producing in this footprint. They're not showing you the square kilometers of grain going into the house, or the square kilometers of manure coming out, or the fish kills caused by the excess nutrients in that region that are created by it. They're not showing any of that kind of external context. And on our farm, when you come and you see the pigs on pasture, the chickens, the cows, whatever, you're seeing the acreage. In other words, it doesn't take one more acre to grow that food outside of a factory house than it does inside. The only difference is that instead of things being segregated from their inputs and outputs in a little tight spot, instead they're integrated into the larger ecosystem, and so it may look like it takes more land, but it actually doesn't take one more acre.
Well, it's so interesting, isn't it, that this word synergy, because in healthcare for our bodies, we're learning that actually our relationship with bacteria is really important. The gut microbiome is now seen as the major breakthrough. Instead of taking this adversarial approach of everything being antibacterial and antibiotics and killing bacteria, if we actually feed our friends and not our foes, our health is better for it. But there's a similar story going on in the soils too, isn't there?
Absolutely. In fact, these are very much bacterial cousins. And I find it fascinating that today we have kind of two divergent trajectories, at least here in the U.S., and I think the same in Australia and Europe. And that is, one is the trajectory where the orthodoxy of the day is, in order to be safe, it has to be sterile. Now, if you're in a surgery, yes, you want sterility in a surgery. But in our day-to-day living, we don't want sterile. We want a terrain or a habitat in which the good bugs beat out the bad bugs, where there's a battleground that the good bugs are winning. And I'm using bugs in a very, very...
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, bacteria, fungi, anything that's,
Nematodes, protozoa, all those things. Actually, something like 95 to 98% of them are actually good, and only a few are pathogenic. So with just a little bit of effort, we can actually create a terrain, a habitat, in which the good ones beat the bad ones.
Now, you're talking soils here?
Yes.
Yes, because it's the same in the body. It's the same in the body.
Yeah, exactly. I'm talking animals, plants, the whole deal. And so isn't it interesting that right now we have these two trajectories, one in, the whole food safety system and everything, where everything's supposed to be chlorinated and antimicrobial and sterilize it. And, we've got Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is perfectly safe, but raw milk is, hazardous because it's got creepy crawlies in it. And we've got that trajectory. And on the other side of that, we've got this, what you just talked about, is our new trajectory of understanding the human microbiome and realizing, wow, our gut actually affects our emotional health, our psychological stability, our mental health. Brain function comes from how our large intestine is working today. I mean,
it's big.
It's not a surprise at all to those of us who have embraced a more natural way of living, but it is profoundly shattering to this idea that we are fundamentally mechanical and we can just part our way through life, one piece at a time.
Yeah, and of course, these bugs in the soil confer quite a lot to that soil, and I know that people are getting into the grass-fed, pasture-fed and finished. That's quite an important point, pasture-fed and finished, because that can change very quickly if an animal goes into a feedlot for 4 or 6 weeks.
Yes, absolutely.
What's so good about grass-fed? Let's talk about that first. Why is grass-fed so much better?
Well, there's several things. One is, and we can talk about grass-finished, because it only takes about 2 weeks of grain feeding on an herbivore to virtually chase out all the conjugated linoleic acid. Now, CLA was discovered, conjugated linoleic acid was discovered in the late 1960s. It's an essential fatty acid. It's a long-chain fatty acid, and it's got numerous functions, one of which is to maintain the elasticity of the synapses in the nerve endings. CLA, I liken it to, it's like packing peanuts. It's like packing peanuts in our nerve systems. And as you age, your elasticity starts to dwindle, and the CLA gives your nerve endings better functionality. CLA is also the number one anti-carcinogen in the world. So, for example, in the U.S., where the per capita consumption of red meat, of beef, is about 60 pounds per person per year, in Argentina, it's 150 pounds per capita. You think about that, that means the average Argentinian is eating half a pound of beef per day every single day of the year. That's pretty amazing. I mean, even people like me don't eat that much. So what's interesting is that in Argentina they had half the colon cancer rate in the U.S., and supposedly, red meat caused colon cancer and all this stuff. And they got to looking into it and found out and realized, oh, this CLA thing is the answer, because in Argentina everything is grass-finished. They can't afford grain. They've been grazing the pampas all these years, and so everything is grass-finished. So they have these real high levels of CLA, and in the U.S., where we're grain finishing, we have these incredibly low levels of CLA, hence the difference in the colon cancer rates. That's just one thing. There are so many. I mean, riboflavin, there's another big one. Grass-finished beef has 300%, that's 3 times as much riboflavin as grain-finished beef.
Now that's B2, isn't it? Is that riboflavin B2, or what is that anyway?
I think it is B2. It's one of the Bs. one of the busy bees. And people say, well, okay, so what's the deal with riboflavin? Well, riboflavin is known as the calming fatty acid. It calms you down. And so you begin wondering some of these, rampant shootings and so on, spousal abuse and children with, ADHD bouncing off the walls and whatever. We're actually seeing increased temper and anger and mental instability, agitation, as we move away from grass-finished animal proteins, because we're not getting the riboflavin, which is the stress reliever fatty acid, the calming thing. And so, this kind of thing just goes through our eggs. We submitted our eggs to a national study. Mother Earth News magazine picked 12 farms around the U.S. to do a study on pastured eggs to see about the difference. And so we were one of the 12 farms picked, and so we sent eggs to this lab in it was Oregon or Washington State. It was somewhere out in the Pacific Northwest, and they measured about 12 things. I'll just pick out one: folic acid. Folic acid is very, very important, and you're a doctor, so I'll get way over my skis here in a quick. So you bring me back to the earth if you need to. Folic acid is really important for carrying pregnancy, for healthy pregnancy, and the conventional eggs that come out of the factory house, the actual, Department of Agriculture official, micrograms per egg is, I think, 48 micrograms per egg, out of the store, the normal egg. And our eggs measured 1,038 micrograms of folic acid per egg.
Wow.
So, and it's not because it's not because our eggs were bigger, it's the same size egg, but when you start looking at these things, you begin realizing very quickly we're not talking about slight little nuanced changes. We're talking about light-year exponential differences. If you are what you eat, you also are what you eat eats. Mm. And so, that's what we're finding now as we become more sophisticated in our technological analysis of things. We're starting to see that the things that we taste, the things that we intuit, actually have tremendous amount of scientific empirical basis.
Yeah, because we started this conversation about you talking about N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. And of course, The fact is that for our human body to function properly, we actually need more than 3 elements. We actually need somewhere between 60 and 70 elements. And we, as you say, we're not only what we eat, but we are what the things that we eat. And that's where that microbes comes in, really, isn't it? Because that's where it's those microbes that confer more than just N, P, and K.
Yes, you're exactly right. And what feeds those microbes, well, there are numerous things that feed them, but the main thing that feeds them is decaying carbon, decaying organic matter. So our entire farming system needs to move toward a non-tillage, perennially based, integrated with animals. There's not a healthy ecology in the world that is animalless, and yet look how many farms we try to have that have no animals. So when we start moving to this other direction of decay, carbon, biomass, and some animals, integrated animals, what we start seeing is a much more diverse, complex mix, a cocktail, if you will, a cocktail of way more diversified elements and microbes. One of the interesting ones, for example, is earthworms. Earthworms go down and they emit a saliva, and it dissolves things in the ground, and then they ingest things, and it goes through their alimentary canal, and they excrete it. And what's amazing is that what they excrete, which, by the way, is the same weight of what they ingest, so you're ingesting a kilogram and you're excreting a kilogram, the excretions are 3 times the calcium, 7 times the potassium, 11 times the phosphorus of what came in the front end. And even with all of our computers, our satellites, our ability to send men to the moon, all the things that we've done, we still don't understand how that earthworm can, just through the processes of its alimentary canal, how it can, what's the right word, step up, how it can synergize and step up its excretions, seemingly from nowhere.
Yes, what a wonderful little factory. We've got all these factories going on in the soil, which actually, with all the herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, and all the N, P, and K, we don't have that. I mean, the earthworms aren't happening really to the same degree or at all, nor are those microbes in the soil.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. A lot of people, think of soil as dirt, just something inert, that you have to put bleach on your britches to get it cleaned out. And actually, the soil is a double handful of healthy soil, has as many living beings in it as there are people on the face of the earth. If I just said a handful of soil has as many beings in it as there are people in Sydney, you would stand up and, whoa, that's pretty cool, Or if I said in all of Australia, wow, that's cool. But it's in all the world, all the planet, all the people on the earth, there are more beings. And so that's how complex it is. It's when we talk about community, that is the ultimate community. And they're all trading. They're eating, being eaten, they're dividing, they're procreating, they're dying, and they're trading. There's this, I call it the underground cafe, and they're trading. They walk up to the root hairs of a grass plant and say, hey, I see you've got 2 polysaccharides. I've got a little boron in my pocket. Could I trade you 2 packages of boron for 2 of those sugar polysaccharides you've got? And there's this entire cafe going on under there of trading, and they actually talk to each other. There's a language that they use, and it's truly sentient and profound.
Yeah. Now, Joel, tell me, for somebody, and most of our listeners, of course, will be in the city, will be consumers of food, how do we support this system? Because, one of my favourite themes is that although we get to vote once every 3, 4 or 5 years, and we know what that does sometimes, particularly in America, but we won't go there. But one of the things we do get to do is vote with our money and decisions we make. So how do we, what would you say to the consumer in the city? How do we get on board this whole movement of biological farming rather than mechanical farming?
Yeah, what a great question. So I've got a kind of a 3-part answer to this. Just stay with me I'll just zip through it very quickly. The first thing you can do is to get in your kitchen. And I don't mean, go to grandma's kitchen with a wood stove. I mean, go in there with all of the techno gadgetry we've got today, time bake, slow cookers, indoor plumbing, oven with heat on demand, that sort of thing. But begin working with food. One of our biggest problems today is that I'm saying we very collectively and loosely as a developed cultures, we have this notion that we can levitate ourselves into some nirvanic space, Star Trek era, above our umbilical, ecological umbilical, and be fine. And the truth is, you can't. You can't refuse to participate in something as foundational and intimate to our bodies as food. You can't so profoundly abdicate any participation in that and expect things to stay authentic.
Yep. If the evidence is anything to go on, and the degenerative diseases are evidence of that, you can either choose to be part of that system or take control yourself. Yeah, go on, Joel.
Yeah. No, that's very good. So the reason I start with that point is because people want a different outcome, but they don't want to change anything. And that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So you've got to come down off of the bleachers, quit complaining and quit whining, and join this whole tribe, all right? So get in your kitchen and start working with food. Number 2, grow something or do something yourself, even if it's a little vermicomposting bin under your kitchen sink, or a patio, a hanging patio garden, off the balcony or deck. You can essentially grow all of your own herbs in a little plastic tube with pockets in it that's packed with compost, and you just drip about a cup of water in there every day, and you can grow all of your herbs for a household in literally a little hanging tube that's the size of a glorified wind chime. So do something yourself that gets you participating and in touch with this awesome and mystical and amazing world life. All right, that's number 2. Number 3 is take your recreational and entertainment time and financial budget for a period of time. It can be a month, maybe it's 2 months, but take a period of time and say, okay, for this period of time, whatever we spent watching movies, whatever we spent going to the ballet or whatever, and these are all good activities. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever watch a movie or go to the ballet. I'm just saying take a period of time and take a sabbatical. Take a sabbatical from that and say, okay, for this period of time, we're going to take that time and money and we're going to invest it in finding our integrity food solution. Maybe we'll visit some local farms. Maybe we'll go to a farmer's market. Maybe we'll join a CSA. Maybe we'll, whatever. But the point is, we commit ourselves for a period of time to finding those. In fact, in Australia, my favorite word in all the world, we can become food fossickers. We go food fossicking, to find the gold mine, the treasure that's in our community. And those 3 things, get in the kitchen, do something yourself, and find your source. If you will commit to those 3 things, in a year, you will look back and say, my goodness me, how did we ever survive before this? It will fundamentally rock your world.
Yeah, and that, really what is good for, I think this is also a really important message, which I know you would agree with, and that is what's good for the individual's health is usually good for the planet's health. Yes. And the two are just inseparable.
Absolutely. Wendell Berry even takes this a little step further, and he says there really are no global problems. There really are only local problems, and he kind of springs that off. There's an old Chinese saying, he doesn't use this, but one that I've enjoyed. There's an old Chinese saying that says, if everyone would sweep in front of their own doorstep, the whole world would be clean. It's so easy for us. We love to sit and point fingers and say, well, things would be better if those people over there would just do the right thing, or if those people over there were not crooks, or if those people over there did not worship money, or you can name your bogeyman, And the truth is, those people over there, you can't change those people over there. Those people over there are going to do what they're going to do. But you can change the person in the mirror. And you can change that trajectory, that outcome. And ultimately, if each of us would focus on that, then those people over there would become us.
Great. Look, Joel, I think the other thing that I love, and I'll just leave this thought to, is this whole idea of synergy with our microbial community. And you said, be it in our bodies or in the soil, that you said 95% of them are good. And I think that's almost a metaphor for the people on the planet. I like to think that 95% of the people on the planet are good. And if we could learn to live synergistically with them as we do our microbiomes, then I think the world would be a better place for it.
Yes. Well, I think you're exactly right. And in fact, I would even go so far as to say that our abuse and assault on nature's patterns and templates, that violence that we bring to our living, that is a kind of a worldview, a paradigm. It affects the way we view each other. It affects the way we see our neighbors, the way we see our own selves fitting into something grander and bigger than ourselves. And I absolutely believe that when a society sees its pigs as just inanimate piles of protoplasmic structure to be manipulated however cleverly we can manipulate them, rather than appreciating the pigness of the pig and the happiness of the pig, when we just view it as an object to utilize, pretty soon we start seeing each other as an object to utilize, other citizens and other cultures as simply objects to utilize. Yes, you have hit on a very profound theme that I couldn't agree with more.
And on that note, Joel, thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this conversation, and we could talk for hours, so thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Well, as we both said, this choice between mechanical, industrialized farming, where actually half of the food that is produced is actually thrown away in food waste. I mean, the soils, do we only need 3 elements, nitrogen, phosphate, potassium? No, we need 60 or 70. And this whole idea of having a respect for the microbiome, not just in our own bodies, but in the soil, this is about taking control and making decisions that can make a difference. Get into food, get going with it. Even growing something small, I thought that was fantastic what he said, because at least you appreciate the complexity that goes into producing food. And get out there and buy proper food, real food. And if you think it's a little more expensive, well, add in all the other costs. It's not just the cost of the food in the supermarket or on the shelf. It's the health costs that come with it. It's the environmental costs that come with it. It's whether you want to be nurturing soil that your children and their children can still be growing nutrient-dense foods on. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It certainly fired me up as though I needed any more firing up. Until next week, I hope this finds you well. This is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in